Thank you, Doug, and everyone. Just to give you a little bit more background on myself, so you know who the speaker is. My job as the president of the board for MNSEIA is a volunteer job, and my day job is I'm a solar and energy storage consultant, and most of the work I do is project development, and I usually work for developers or installers that are trying to put projects together and get them built. So what I want to speak about tonight is what's happening with solar in Minnesota. This particular picture is one of my favorite pictures of a solar installation. Innovative Power Systems, or otherwise known as IPS Solar. That's their project. It's a 6 megawatt installation, CSG Community Solar Garden. And it would be about 5 megawatts AC rated. The PV modules are about 6 megawatts. So I have a little menu here of what I want to cover tonight. First I want to start out with kind of like what's going on the planet and in the country, then bring that back to Minnesota so you have a little perspective on how we're doing here compared to other places. And I want to spend some more time on community solar. That's a big part of what's going on with solar in Minnesota. And then cover some of the policy topics that are going on with the Public Utilities Commission, with the state legislature this year. Talk a little bit about solar incentives that we have. And then I want to finish up with some of the, quote, external factors like climate change and air and water pollution that we need to deal with, but don't get rolled into the market. So here we have a picture of what it looks like on the planet for various sources of energy. And what I want to point out in particular on this is the slope of those lines. So you see renewables and natural gas are what's increasing the most. And not just now, but also looking into the future. And this is a forecast that comes from the U.S. Department of Energy Energy Information Administration, otherwise known as EIA, and they always have very good historical data, and sometimes their predictions are not right on, you know, but it's just a prediction. I have a note down on the bottom of the slide there that says Bloomberg Energy Finance New Energy Finance is forecasting about another something more than 100 gigawatts of solar installation, and last year we did about a little over 109 on the planet. So in the US we have a similar picture. On the left here we have energy, and on the right the share of generation. So you can see, similarly that renewables are in the increase, and natural gas is on the increase, coal is on the decrease. If you go back for a second, you see that the rest of the planet, coal is kind of more flattening out, whereas in the US, we're trending down much more dramatically than the rest of the world. There'll be, coal probably burned for several decades yet, which is the dirtiest fuel that gets used for power generation. And this slide here, I'm just showing the growth going on in the solar industry in Minnesota. The yellow line is what's going on with the prices, and it's economics. It's as you get more volume, prices come down. You get economy of scale, learning curve effects. Every year they seem to get a little bit more efficient. What you can buy, you can get more for your money a little more every year, a few more watts. Anywhere from like 10 to 20, 30 watts per panel more for roughly the same cost per watt. And that does help get the installation cost down. And this slide here is showing some prices. Now this is showing residential prices, but really what I want to highlight here is what's going on with the cost of solar PV modules. You can see in 2010, the price for just the modules, those yellow bars, is a lot higher than we are in 2008, significantly higher. They've come down 82% in price. Now this is an NREL study, National Renewable Energy Labs, part of the U.S. Department of Energy. And the total system cost has come down 63%. So, you know, as a share of the total cost, that's the most expensive part of it as a group. You know, you have usually a bunch of modules, and that's usually the biggest chunk of money coming in there. The next most expensive would usually be the AC inverter, and that would be the single component that's the most expensive. And here's a different study done about the same time, both published last year, from Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratories and they just had a little different methodology, and you can see they have some median prices. Does this have a pointer in it? Yeah, here we go. So you have some median prices here, utility scale, commercial and large commercial, and residential, and they're quite a bit different than the NREL study. And I would say that both prices in Minnesota are somewhere in between. What you see here is showing like 270 watt, and like for residential, like 375. That's a huge range. I don't think you would see that much range in Minnesota. But the important point on this slide is here we have 2 kilowatts. Up here we have greater than 12 kilowatts. As the size goes up for an installation, the price goes down. Similarly with these others here. So that's an important point I want to establish. You know, perhaps you know that, but it's relevant to some one of the slides coming up. In Minnesota, we are ranked 13th in the nation for the amount of solar that we have installed in the state. And that's also about a gigawatt now. Last year we put in a lot. We put in 348 megawatts. And so almost a third, or actually roughly more than a third just in 1 year. So you can see it's just growing really fast in Minnesota. We now get 2% of our generation in the state from solar electric. Prices have fallen 47% in the last 5 years. And SEIA, the National Trade Association, MNSEIA, who I'm associated with, is the local chapter, the state chapter of the National Association. So SEIA is predicting that we'll have another 837 megawatts in the next 5 years. Personally, I think I'm a little more optimistic than that. But you know, they're both forecasts. We'll see who's right. This chart here is from the Minnesota Commerce Department, and they published this in 2018. So they only had 2017 numbers, so what I've done here is take the SEIA number and add it onto their chart. So, you know, SEIA is this number here, and these other numbers are from the Commerce Department. And myself and some of the other staff members at MNSEIA believe that actually those Commerce Department numbers are a little on the low side, because some of their numbers are rated for AC, some are rated for DC. AC would be a lower number. So we think that they're a little bit conservative, but generally in agreement with what SEIA's got. And along with the installation, of course, you get jobs. And now we have like 250,000 people in the country that are somehow working on solar projects. And in Minnesota, we have about almost 60,000 clean energy jobs through 2017. In 2018, and in 2017 we had like 4,200 solar jobs. About 10 years ago, there weren't many jobs in solar in Minnesota. There's a few small installers. It's really changed a lot. I want to say a little bit about solar and storage, because that is really part of the future that's going to be a game changer for solar. Solar energy is a variable resource. You know, we all know that because the sun doesn't shine every day. We don't have sun at night. But if you can store that energy, now you can use it for base load. You can dispatch it whenever you want. There's a lot of applications that it can be used for. besides, you know, base load would be like, you know, a cool thing to use solar for, but you know, it can be used for like peak shaving when the utility has a peak. And as a matter of fact, Connexus, who's the largest co-op in the state, and Dakota Electric, second largest, are doing a couple projects. And Grand Rapids Municipal has got one coming up that's just in the request for information phase right now. Those projects are all looking at putting in pretty good sized solar arrays, 10 megawatts. The one in Grand Rapids is smaller, 1 to 2 megawatts. And pretty good sized battery systems, about as many megawatts of battery storage as the solar. And you see they're rated in both megawatts and megawatt hours. So what that means is that battery can discharge for 2 to 4 hours, depending on which batteries they install there. So usually you'll see that with batteries, they'll get a couple of ratings. More often you'll see megawatt hours, but what's relevant also is the megawatt rating, the power rating on these, because they're doing peak shaving, that's the highest peak they can shave. So if they had a utility had a peak that was higher than that and they want to shave it, that battery inverter is not big enough. And I put a little more information in the slide, so those that get their hands on the slide, if they want interested in those projects, there's more information on those links there. And you know what's going on with that is batteries are going down in price dramatically, and they're projected to continue to go down dramatically. And that's driven largely by what's going on with electric vehicles. There's going to be a huge increase in electric vehicles. Here you have like several different forecasts, and then you have the average here. It's millions of vehicles that'll be on the road, and you know, not that many years ahead of us. Some of the manufacturers have already got plans to discontinue all their internal combustion engine vehicles. And what I want to spend a little more time on here, because it is a big part of what's going on with solar in Minnesota, is community solar. We have, there's about 28 co-ops that have, and municipal utilities that have some size solar array. They range, there's a big range in size. Smaller ones are usually around 40 kilowatts, and larger ones, I think Buffalo Municipal Utilities got 7 megawatt installation. And Minnesota Power has, who's one of the investor-owned utilities, Minnesota Power has a 1 megawatt community solar array, and then another 40 kilowatt one. This one's in Duluth. And here's how they're charging for it at Minnesota Power. $2.13 a watt, and if you saw some of those numbers for residential install, you know, they were like right around $3 a watt. That's a good price to be able to buy. You subscribe to a panel at a time at $2.13 a watt. So no surprise, it's fully subscribed. They just put that up on their website this week. And for community solar, 1 megawatt is, you know, it's not a huge amount, but you know, that's their start of the program. And the biggest program is what Xcel has, that they call their community solar rewards community. And I put the PUC docket numbers up here just because I had that with Xcel. We'll get into that a little bit later. But I also put some links here for some more information about some of these. Organization called CERTS has a pretty good website. Kind of starts at the ground floor and gives you a lot of information about community solar gardens, like some information on how to like sort out which one is the right one for you. A lot of the co-ops and municipals that have them, they're all listed on there. And Minnesota Power's got theirs here in Xcel. I wouldn't say Xcel has as much information on it for deciding who you want to go with as CERTS would. So even for Xcel and Minnesota Power, you could go to the CERTS site and get some good information. So here I have some more details about what's going on with community solar, and this all this information here came from the most recent filing that Xcel made on the PUC docket for community solar. Every year they give monthly reports, and this is from their annual report just published on April 1st. And they have, by the end of 2018, 505 megawatts installed and operating now. That's pretty huge. That's like half of the state, that installed base. So it gives you I mean, that's why I want to spend some time talking about it. It's an important part of what's going on with solar in Minnesota, and they have the most successful and largest program in the nation. So they've, the program is just, ramped up really fast. Last year they put in 259 megawatts, which is like half of what's installed now. So last year was also a big year. They had 50% increase in the number of subscriptions. People who subscribe for the energy on these gardens. By capacity, 89% were commercial subscribers, 11% residential, and they had over 12,000 unique retail customers subscribing. But there you had kind of the flip situation. Only 7% of the customers were commercial, 93% residential. So what does that say? You have a few large corporate commercial customers taking up huge blocks of these solar gardens. No one, according to the state law, no one customer can have more than 40% of of a particular garden, but they could subscribe to multiple gardens. So, and in fact, that's what some of them are doing. And so we'll have a little bit more about that in the next slide, but that's a noteworthy observation there. Average number of subscribers, 80 per garden. So usually it's not just all commercial. There's quite a few residential and a few big commercial ones on a garden. And this year, or in 2018, they had 205 new applications compared to only 67 in 2017. So it's continuing to ramp up. And they delivered a lot of energy off that garden. That's 587 gigawatts in 2018, or gigawatt hours. So, it's making a difference. And there's a couple of PUC dockets that I want to talk about. For those who aren't familiar, the PUC is the Public Utilities Commission, and they regulate the public utilities like Xcel Energy, Minnesota Power, Otter Tail Power. They're all investor-owned utilities. And they also rate regulate Dakota Electric. Dakota Electric is a co-op, but they opted some years ago to be regulated by the PUC. So these PUC dockets will generally be about those utilities, but with things like net metering law, which is a statewide law, it could include some of the co-ops as well in municipalities.
Could you explain what the docket is?
Well, the docket is basically, I don't know if we'll have time to look on the website, but if you wanted to go look at the dockets, basically it's just where things are posted for the PUC will open up a docket, so it's like a placeholder in the calendar and a place to file public comments, utility comments, PUC orders, where everyone can go and see that information. And you can find it pretty easy. You just Google PUC Minnesota, and their website's pretty easy to navigate. Just go to eDockets on there. Like 13-867 is the docket number for community solar, so that's the year it was started, 13. So you put in the year in one box, and then the docket number 867 in the next box. And then they give you might have 1,000 documents on a docket, depending on how old it is. So, but you don't necessarily have to read them all. It gives you a hint as to what they're about, brief description. After you've looked at a few, you kind of know what to look for. A lot of times PUC orders or compliance filings by the utilities are interesting. Like Xcel's annual report was a compliance filing that they put up. So what's going on with the community solar docket at the PUC is you can see the rates here at the top. Value solar is how they determine what they pay the community solar owners, the system owners. That's how much they pay for a kilowatt hour produced. And then the owners have to cover all their costs with that, including like your overhead and customer service over 25 years. It's not just build it and they're done. I mean, they have to operate this for 25 years typically. So that's really their what they get from the utility, and then they also get subscription revenue from the subscribers, and that would typically be a little less than the retail rate. But here you see in 2016 the retail rate was something called the applicable retail rate. That's what they started out with before they actually calculated what these value solar rates would be. That took a little time to figure out these value solar rates. Department of Commerce developed a methodology for that, so it took a number of public meetings and public input to start out this value solar methodology. But you can see it started out pretty generous at about 15.5 cents, and that included 3 cents that Xcel was paying for renewable energy credits. So they were paying roughly 12.5 cents for these. The first year they were installed was 2015. That was slightly higher, about another half penny, I think it was. And then you see it went down to, when they started value solar, to 10.33 cents, 9.75, and this year it's about 9 cents. And I put up here too the retail rates for comparison, so you get a better understanding of how the significance of these rates. Here you have what's called the net metering A50 rate. So if you have solar panels on your house, Xcel calculates what the average retail rate is, and they include certain things in there and certain things are excluded, like taxes. When you look at your bill, your cost per kilowatt hour will be less than this amount here, but they've added in all these little extras like the fuel cost adjustment, environmental riders, things like that. And so that's the average retail rate annually, but that compares to 9 cents right now. This is the current rate for residential, so the developers have to make up 3.5 cents to make that work for people. And typically they would try to give them a subscription rate a little below the retail rate the customer would otherwise be paying Xcel. And the commercial rates here, they're called non-demand or demand and non-demand. The commercial rate's 6 2/3 cents. So here you just have the opposite situation. You got about a 3.5 cent spread to the good of the developers. So no surprise that we're getting almost all commercial. Most of the capacity is getting taken up by the commercial customers, and they're big companies like Ecolabs, General Mills, people that have sustainability missions in their corporate charter, and they're just taking up big chunks of this community solar. It's a really easy way to go. You just sign the contract, they have their lawyers look it over, of course, and then as soon as the gardens are installed, they're saving money right away on their electric bill. And usually it'll be for the commercial customers around a penny that they're saving per kilowatt hour, and that adds up to a lot of money for some of these big customers over the year. Xcel last year paid out $92 million for these subscriptions at this rate here. So that's what they paid out, but that wouldn't be the amount of the savings. But a chunk of that you'd probably be saving, like maybe an eighth of that. So another thing going on with community solar is developers are complaining like, hey, we can't make this work very well, because we have this kind of reverse spread here, 9 cents versus like 12.5, and you got to help us out here because residential customers cost us more too. We have more customer interaction, more customer acquisition costs, customer service costs for 25 years that they have to roll into their prices. So the PUC there were proposals anywhere from 0 to 2.5 cents. But the PUC did decide that it was in the public interest to give a 1.5 cent adder, so this number here actually ends up being about 10.5 cents now for the, so that's about half of the spread there. It gets them half the way there. It's not going to fix the problem where you get all the big corporations taking up the capacity, but it's a little better. And one of the things that happens with this value of solar, it's a calculation that's actually got a stack of different calculations that they put together and sum up. And it might be like line losses. One of them is distribution equipment, increase or decrease. Last year, Xcel had a decrease in demand for putting in, like, distribution equipment would be like, you know, poles, wires, transformers. They had a decrease last year. So that number turned out to be a 0 in the value of solar in the stack of costs. But the year before, it was 3.6 cents. That's a huge swing. You know, it's like a third of what, more than a third of what the value of solar rate is. So that also makes it really hard for the developers, you know, any company likes to have an even keel instead of, like, you know, a wavy sea to travel on. So that's something that's being talked about at the PUC and at the Legislature to try to, maybe they could average that over maybe 3 years or something like that, so that the rate didn't change so dramatically. And then when it was going to change, you'd have a little more notice on it. These value solar rates get announced by April 1st, you know, and they're trying to build these in the same year if they can, so they don't get a lot of notice on this either. And another thing going on with community solar is this co-location cap. When the Xcel first started this program, it was enabled by the Minnesota Legislature in 2013. There were big national developers coming into the state and co-locating as many as 20 gardens, so it's more like a 20 megawatt installation. They just put them side by side. When they build them, you know, they have 20 separate interconnections to the grid, but they have, you know, a field full of 20 panels. So that's why I was pointing out the importance of the scale matters, because the bigger the systems are, the lower the cost is. For the developers who could do that, they would have a cost advantage over people that are building 1 megawatt solar arrays. And Xcel pretty much freaked out when they saw that happening. They had 1,000 applications, and they're like, what are we going to do with all these? How big is this going to be? How do we do our resource planning? So they actually put the brakes in the program for 2 years, which technically they're not supposed to do. You know, but they had an ear at the PUC. The PUC has to make it work for everybody. The PUC is like, okay, it's for the public good to have the program work for Xcel too. So they told Xcel when Xcel asked to put a cap on it for co-location, they told Xcel, no, you can't put any limits on the program, because in the statute it says any plan approved by the PUC Commission must reasonably allow for the creation, financing, and accessibility of solar gardens. So that phrase right there is like telling Xcel they can't put any limits on the program. So Xcel kind of regrouped on that. About a year later, they came back, and this time they had made a deal with some of the smaller developers in Minnesota, because some of these small developers who don't have the deep pockets for the financing were getting crunched, having their gardens just on hold for a whole year. You know, they have investors lined up, and their investors are like, hey, we want this installed or we're going to walk. And so they had a lot of pressure on them. So the local installers, a group of them, made a deal with Xcel, and they said, okay, we'll let you do, Xcel said, you can have a 5 megawatt cap for any applications that came in before September 25th, 2015. And after that, it's 1 megawatt. So that first slide you saw there, that was a 5 megawatt community solar garden, because that was one of the early applications. And there are quite a few 5 megawatt gardens. And they're pretty much finished up with the installation now of the 2015 applications. They started taking applications at the end of December of 2014, so really Effectively 2015 is when the program started. So that's also a difficulty for the developers because they're kind of between a rock and a hard place. Here they have a cap of 1 megawatt now, and on the other end, the revenues, it's 9 cents when they have to try to incentivize the customer who's paying 12 cents. They can't make that up unless they're commercial customers. So more on that a little later, because I'm going to talk about what's going on at the legislature too. But on the docket and at the legislature, Xcel is now complaining, and as a matter of fact, in their annual report, I think it was in there like 4 times, in the beginning and the end, a couple times in the middle, that they're paying between 11 and 12.5 cents for community solar garden energy, and that they could be paying 4 cents for utility scale solar. Well, I want to take a minute to harp on that a little bit because Xcel is out of line making that complaint, really, because first of all, utility scale is typically like 100 megawatts. And they're saying, hey, you can only build 1 megawatt, and we could buy that energy for 4 cents. So it's not really a valid comparison in that way. Furthermore, these value of solar rates are not a cost recovery rate for Xcel. It's designed, and it came along in place of net metering, to compensate the utilities for the value delivered by the solar array on the grid, for where it's located, what other benefits it brings to the grid, the fact that it's distributed, not centralized energy. There are benefits to distributed generation. And so, comparing what they can buy a utility, centralized 100 megawatt utility scale rate to community solar gardens, it's just a false comparison, but it's their political rhetoric right now. And, I think this is my opinion of what's going on, my personal opinion, is Xcel's a Wall Street company, and so they always have the pressure from Wall Street to make more money for the investors. The PUC regulates them about how much they can make, but, they usually want to push their revenue up because they'll get a certain percentage. That's how they make more. They usually don't complain so much about their profits they're getting, because that's regulated. They'll complain when they lose revenue, and when they're paying too much, they think they're paying too much. And for investors, when you save a penny, that goes right to the bottom line. So investors are putting pressure on them to save money, and I'm sure they got investors saying, hey, what's going on? 12 to 11 cents a kilowatt hour, and you could be buying that for 4 or maybe less. Xcel's got bids out in Colorado for some big utility scale solar for even less than 4 cents a kilowatt hour. Well, you know what? Wall Street doesn't really care how dirty the money is unless somebody's going to jail. And if they got caught doing something illegal, they're probably not going to jail anyway. They're just taking the money that they stuffed in their pockets and paying a fine. Very rarely does that happen. And I'm trying to be cynical about that. I think that's actually the way the system works. If any of you here have IRA or 401k, you probably have an S&P 500 index fund in there or something like that. Well, what do you know about what those 500 companies are doing beyond, how much money are they making me for today or this quarter or this year? And if it's not good enough, okay, who's next? That's just how it works on Wall Street. And we all contribute to that. That's the system. I don't blame Xcel for that being the system. Don't get me wrong, I think Xcel is a great company, and that's why I put this slide up here. Xcel, last November, they announced that they're going to be 80% carbon free by 2030 with all their electric power generation, and 100% by 2050. They're the first major utility in the nation that did that. That takes a lot of courage for a Wall Street company to do that, to be the first one to step up and say, we're doing that. And Xcel has gotten a lot of awards for best place to work. They're a good company. I know a lot of people at Xcel. There's no bad people I know at Xcel. They have a lot of really good professionals there that are really good at their jobs, and a lot of them, they want solar on the grid too. They want wind and solar and renewables, but they have to do their job. And they have a lot of people to keep happy. They got to keep the PUC happy, Got to keep the shareholders happy, the ratepayers happy, the general public, the legislature. It's tough keeping everybody happy all the time. It's complicated. But that doesn't mean I always agree with them either, you know. So another important docket going on at the PUC is what's called the Photovoltaic Demand Credit Rider. So these riders, they get added onto a particular rate that a customer would have with Xcel. And this one here, most riders you pay something extra for. This one here you get a credit for. And this is for commercial, usually they're going to be commercial systems because they have to be bigger than 40 kilowatts. And so they're not getting retail rate when they sell energy. They might be getting 3 cents or something like that. Or a retail rate, you know, it'd be like 6 2/3 cents roughly. But they get, on top of that, they get this 7.139 cents. So that's a generous amount of money between 1 o'clock and 7. So not all day long. And, you know, you might actually, you know, miss the best part of the day at noon with this. And you're not getting this extra money except for these hours. And if you were to do the math and look at like all the sun hours, because you can get weather data from NREL, and look at all the sun hours for the whole year, you can, on an hourly basis, and just take the ones between 1 and 7, it turns out to be about 38.7% for the weather data from the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. So instead of getting 100% for the 7.139 cents, you're getting that output for that percentage of the output at that rate. And it does have some limits. These limits, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on it because you really can't make sense of them until you are looking at the customer's bill. Because the limits are, like for instance, this one here is a credit limit for kilowatt hours. You know, you take their peak, multiply by 100 hours. Well, if you don't know what their peak is, you get that off their electric bill. You can't really figure out what that number is. And then they also have maximum credit that you can get here too, and that depends on something called firm demand, which basically means that it's there 65% of the time at least. Mike, did you have a question?
Do they allow you to aim your array southwest?
Yeah, you can put it however you want. You can put it north facing if you want to. You know?
And if you put it southwest, that number for 38.7 might go up.
True. Yeah, this number is would be for due south facing. And I think I used, easiest one to calculate that with was, there's a tool called Pathfinder, Solar Pathfinder. Some of you probably know what that is. You get a software tool with it called Pathfinder Assistant. You can actually, in that tool, tell it which hours of the day you want. And then it'll give you a report based on that. And that one, I think would be a tilt angle, and that assumes a tilt angle and an azimuth angle, and I think that's at 40 degrees, which is about the optimum tilt angle for this part of the state. So that one is actually that PUC decided this rate just last fall, but it's been going on for a while. They changed it. This is a compensation for the capacity that the solar array, not the energy it puts out, but the capacity that it supports the grid with at a location. And so it was originally $5.15 a kilowatt, not for just the kilowatt rating, not 7.139 cents. And it was so complicated to figure out, most people didn't know how to apply it. So PUC was asked to make it simpler, and so they came up with this method to do it. So it's not a gift, it's not a Christmas present from Xcel. It's compensating the bigger solar arrays for the value that they deliver to the grid, for having that capacity there. For example, you have, you're on the end of you're connected to a transformer, and you're on the end of the transformer. You could have some lower voltage there. If you're feeding, or you're near, or actually it wouldn't probably be connected at that level, it'd be more at the substation level, but it's supporting the voltage on there. So if you're far away from the substation, that solar array will be holding the voltage a little higher. That's a value to the customers and to Xcel. And so that's just, you know, part of how, it's a complicated way that they figure it out, but nonetheless, it's compensation for that. And let's see, it was just last November, Xcel did a compliance filing, they called it, and I saw it and I was like, wow, it's like half the price. They did a compliance filing for half the price of this. And usually a compliance filing, they put in their rate sheets from the rate book. Usually the compliance filing is telling us what the rate's going to be. And actually it was a proposal. You had to kind of read it carefully. It was pretty complicated and technical. So Xcel right now is proposing cutting that in roughly in half. And MNSEIA and some others, some of the interested parties are Target Corporation, what's it called? The guys that run the MTC and the light rail, Med Council. They have some big solar arrays. Target's putting a lot on their roofs. And some of the developers are like the interested parties that are, I would say, not always in agreement with Xcel on that, so they're kind of taking a different perspective. Along with MNSEIA. MNSEIA's got over 100 member companies in it, so they represent more than about 130 companies in the state. And we have 3 lobbyists at MNSEIA that are full-time working on stuff like the PUC and Legislature. They're proposing a rate that would be higher than that. And this rate came about because the PUC said, hey guys, you couldn't agree on it before, why don't you get together and negotiate something, tell us what it is, and then maybe we'll approve that. And that's what happened here. So I believe, because that's how it's been working, that's what will happen here too. There'll be some compromise, and it'll be somewhere, it might be a little lower than that, but another possibility is it might just stay the same. So that's yet to be seen, but the significance of this is it enables another sector beyond community solar, commercial systems that would typically be between like 100 kilowatts and a megawatt. So that is something that there's already quite a few installed in that. I'm not sure what the numbers are, but I think it's like a couple hundred with this program. So that's another thing that's going to fuel some growth.
Jan, but it says that they don't know if you wouldn't allow, that doesn't work for anyone, any utility that's using energy storage?
Sorry, I skipped that. Xcel does not allow it. This is only for Xcel. They do not allow energy storage with this rider, which to me makes no sense because, you know, if they're compensating for capacity during their peak, why wouldn't they want to take that noon time or even the time that the solar array is running earlier in the day, store that energy and deliver it to Xcel when it's the most valuable? They pay the most for their energy at their peak because they have to start up more generators, or if they don't have enough generation capacity when all the air conditioners are running in the middle of the summer, they have to go out on the MISO grid, the regional grid, and buy it wholesale and pay spot prices for it. It could be like, you know, $50 $500 a megawatt hour for it. You know, they could be paying really high prices for it. So
It seems like they're discouraging people.
I think, you know, Xcel's got a lot of, in my opinion, strange rules about storage. They're still figuring that out. And that where that's being figured out is with this other docket here, the DG tariff. It's enabled by this Minnesota statute here. And John here in the audience is a technical advisor on that to MNSEIA, so he's participating in that docket on the technical side. John, wave to everyone. You guys probably know John. So not only is he contributing with the ACES conference, he's contributing with MNSEIA with this docket. And this state law was put into place to sort of figure out what to do with the federal standards that allows people to go up to 80 megawatts of solar. But below 10 megawatts, it's like the rules are a lot easier. So the state passed this law in 2001 that says, this is how we're going to interconnect all the solar there in Minnesota up to 10 megawatts. And So they have interconnection standards. They have a standard that are statewide standardized. They have a statewide contract. So we have 170 utilities in the state, and they all have to use the same contract. Xcel, if they want to change it, they got to go to the PUC and ask for permission to change something in their contract. And if they don't, that's illegal. And so this is an important docket because the last time it was updated was 2004. Well, a lot has changed in Minnesota with solar and energy storage since 2004. So those interconnection standards need to be updated. It's called MNDIP, and MNSEIA is the state distributed interconnection agreement. Those two documents the PUC has published, and by June they're going to become the new standard. Mid-June, Xcel is going to switch over. Most of the utilities are about the same time, not all on the same date. So that'll create a little learning curve for everybody.
What does DG mean?
Distributed generation. And by that they mean, like privately owned distributed generation that's not like utility scale centralized. So installed somewhere on the grid, and these would all be privately owned somehow. And an important piece of that isn't just interconnection, but this thing called the DG tariff. This DG tariff in 2004 had this attachment 6 on it, which is on a little different docket. And that's the docket number. The PUC published an order then for this tariff, and it had this attachment on it. And it says that the utility shall compensate for avoided cost plus reasonable credits for emissions. Those that aren't being paid now. Avoided generation, transmission, and distribution costs. Well, I don't know what that number is that they're paying right now. It's in section 10 in their rate book for Xcel. But it's trade secret information. I can't see it unless I sign an NDA. And if I sign it and I knew what it is, I can't tell you what it is. Which makes no sense to me why a public utility would have a trade secret rate. But their rationale is that's their wholesale cost. So they don't want everybody to know their wholesale costs. And so I believe what's being compensated for is their avoided generation costs. And it doesn't necessarily include the transmission and distribution costs that are avoided, and not the emissions. So in about 60 days, Xcel, there's already an order that the PUC put out on March 19th that says Xcel, Minnesota Power, and Otter Power, and Dakota Electric, all the regulated utilities, have to file information to show how they calculate that. So MNSEIA is what's called an intervening party on there, so they'll get to see what all that data is, and they'll have something to say about whether it's a fair deal for everybody. I believe that's going to increase the amount that these big systems over a megawatt up to 10 megawatts are paid. That's another area that I think we're going to see growth in Minnesota. So those are the three most important PUC dockets. And I want to cover quickly what's going on in the legislature too, because some of those are related to what's going on in the PUC. This first one up here is for residential building contractors have to be licensed by the state to install solar. That's not a requirement now. You have to be an electrical contractor. A lot of solar installers are. The reason that's being proposed, MNSEIA and the Department of Labor proposed that, is there's this the residential building contractors have a recovery fund. If you were like get some siding put on your house, gave the installer a deposit, and they just disappeared and they went out of business and you never saw them again, that recovery fund would get you some of your money back. And there was kind of a bad story in the media last year. It was a Wisconsin contractor that essentially that's what happened, and there's a bunch of people that were out the money, and they weren't a residential building contractor, so they can't access the funds from that recovery fund. So this would make it illegal to install solar on a residential property without being a licensed residential contractor. Solar rewards, the House has got a $4 million more they want in solar rewards for the 2019 and 2020, $5 million more for 2021, so it'll go up to 10 million, and these years will go up to 14. It's now 10 and 5, and then add another year, because otherwise 2021 would be the last year. And that's a lot of money, but last year that program had $15 million and it all got used. So it's not like what I would call too much. And then there's another change. The maximum cap on that particular program is rated by DC. In other words, the panel rating instead of AC, the inverter rating, which means usually have about 20% more DC than AC. So it means these big systems could be a little bit bigger, like maybe 45 kilowatts max. And then we have SIP for solar. SIP is conservation improvement money that that people pay in their electric bill that the utilities give back in rebates, like you see, light bulbs, or you put insulation in your house or something like that. A lot of the co-ops and munis don't particularly like that program. They complain that, like, we got all this money and we can't use it all. People are like tired of getting free light bulbs, and they're not buying them anymore. So they're proposing to use that SIP money for solar rebates. And solar acts, as the legislature has recognized before, that solar acts like energy efficiency because it reduces the load on the grid. So that one actually is looking like it may pass. It was put forward to the legislature by the Minnesota Rural Electric Association, which is the trade association for the co-op. So they're all for it, and they often are more. They've often been more often supported by the Republican side of the aisle, and solar's more often been supported by the Democratic side of the aisle. So it looks like everybody likes this one. And solar for schools is a really popular one that a lot of politicians. It's kind of like, kids and babies and the kittens or puppies, politicians want their face on that, put some solar for school. So both the House and the Senate like it, but the debate is how much money goes in. The House wants to put $16 million into it and $600,000 from the general fund, so outside of Xcel territory there'd be some money too. And these would be grants that schools would get so that they would buy down some of the cost for their solar installation. So I have a few more bills here. Energy storage bill was really popular last year. It got vetoed at the end. So did solar for schools. There were some things the governor Dayton didn't like, and so he ended up vetoing those in an omnibus bill. Community solar bundle. There's like a bunch of things there, like increase the co-location cap to 3 megawatts. That's in the House. Remove, the contiguous county requirement. You have to be in an adjacent county to the solar array to subscribe to it. So some of the land it's some of the good places to put solar near the city is starting to get used up and getting more expensive. So some of the developers want that. And provide more residential participation. Right now, I think it says it would require at least 10%.
So, Jan, on the top one for the energy storage bundles,
Yeah.
does it have to have uses battery storage, and then it could have solar with it? So the bundle,
Yeah, I could say a little more about that. I'm just we're starting to run out of time here, so I'm skipping a few things. That's a really popular one. What it would do is it would allow the investor-owned utilities to rate-base solar installations, energy storage installations, so they could do pilot projects. And they would probably do the same type of thing that Dakota Electric and Connexus did. And then there's some money in there for the Department of Commerce to do a study. All the utilities that would participate would have to get in on that and report on it, and then it would all get summarized by Commerce. So that is a good bill. Actually passed the Senate unanimously. The Senate Energy Committee unanimously. It was one of the first ones that passed the Senate committee in the year. So that one looks really likely to pass. The solar on landfills, basically the problem there is you get these landfills, if they're financed by government obligation bonds, no one can make money off of that afterward. So you can't put solar array there. And it's really hard to figure out how some of these landfills were financed. So what they're doing is they're putting $300,000 aside for the Environmental Quality Board to take a look at landfills. It's not doing anything else. It'd be a good place to put some solar panels. solar tax credit, that bill made it through the House Tax Committee, but it's not getting really any support in the Senate, and it's not in any omnibus bills. That one isn't likely to pass. What happened there? So, and there are two different energy omnibus bills in the House and the Senate. Solar in schools is in them, SIP for solar, community solar is in them, the energy storage is in them, solar rewards, the PROCs, solar rewards, and there's some anti-community solar in the Senate. Like usually the Republican legislatures, if Xcel wants something, they listen and they try to give it to them. So that's what's going on in the Senate, I think. And so those bills are all looking pretty good. I believe some of those pro-solar, community solar things will pass, but maybe not all of them because there's opposition in the Senate. And there's a couple other omnibus bills. You got residential building contractors, that's in the House Jobs Omnibus Bill. Bright Fields, that's in Senate Energy and Policy and Finance Committee Omnibus. And the solar tax credit, it's not in any yet and not likely to be. I just want to say something about the tax credit. Maybe you know this, but I think that's going to have a big impact in 2018.
Yeah.
The tax credit's going down.
Can you go back one slide? Just for people's information, there's a big rally on Tuesday of next week at 10:30 a.m. outside of the House meeting room in the state capitol, because the House is going to take up I guess it's the previous slide, but take up the omnibus energy bill.
Okay.
It starts at 11 o'clock.
11 o'clock on Tuesday.
The rally starts at 10:30.
Okay, good to know. Thanks, John. So tax credit's going down, and it goes down to 10% and then stays there for commercial, but it's 0 in 2022. So usually when, something like that happens, you get a big rush to get that. Here's what's going on with community with solar rewards. It was 8 cents a kilowatt hour, now it's 7. But they also added these income qualified or low income extra upfront rebates at $1 per watt, and that makes a big difference. Here's what solar rewards would look like. I did some cash flow sheets on it. You get under 10-year payback. That one's actually under 9 for at least this kind of inputs in there. It's like 8 3/4 kilowatt system at that price. And I just kind of picked this because it made this cash flow all positive. When you get a 5.5% loan for 15 years, you have to put any your own money into it. It's basically a free solar array, and you're paying less for the loan than you are for the what you would have paid for on the electric bill. So, and then it's even better with the low income system. You actually would have a 1-year payback. I set it up as a 2-year because I figured, well, if they're low income, they can't use all the tax credit in the first year. Maybe they'll carry it forward to the second year. But if you're low income, maybe you pay a higher rate and on your interest, and it only takes a 3-year loan to make that all cash positive. So really generous, but most of those are being done on apartments by developers, so they're doing like a power purchase agreement for them. And these are the low-income qualifications from Xcel for the program.
Back that one up a little bit, please.
So family of 4, you couldn't make more than 50,000 or 49 and change. And I put this up here because I want to go back to a point here about what goes on with the energy. Xcel's energy is cleaner than the rest of the state, and the state is cleaner than the nation in general. You only get 11% renewables, and only 6% of that is solar, so it's less than 0.5%. And here's some of the emissions from it. And if you take just these 2 emissions here, these are greenhouse gas emissions. They are up for an average home that uses about 800 kilowatt hours. That's equivalent to taking 1 car off the road each year. And that takes about 5.5 acres of forest to sequester that much carbon. So it shows you a little bit about the problem that we have with climate change. We need about, maybe if we drive 2 cars and we have 1 house that needs another 5.5 acres, we need like 16 acres of land around our houses to sequester all the carbon. And it's now as high as it was 30 million years ago, when the sea levels are 50 to 60 feet higher and 2 to 3 degrees C higher. So that could happen. Here's where it comes from in the state, mostly transportation, the biggest, just barely bigger than electric generation. Agriculture is another story, that's another big chunk. And I wanted to get to this study because this isn't as well known as climate change. The Lancet Commission published a study in 2017 that they're saying it's the number one killer of humans on the planet. Air pollution, water pollution, land pollution, and out of those, air pollution is the worst. So all these are byproducts of burning coal and other fossil fuels. And here's the various things that it does to humans. It's caused 4.5 million deaths a year, according to the World Health Organization. And the Lancet Commission says $4.6 trillion a year is what it's costing the planet, 6% of GDP. So that's the cost that all the utilities aren't paying, that they're shifting onto everyone else. And what can we do about it? Well, here's a bunch of suggestions, and I want to leave you with this question. What can you do about it? I mean, you might be doing a lot of these things, or maybe all these things, but there's always more if you want to do it. And my last slide here is sustainable solutions they can't just be about the money. It has to be about the planet and the people too. Thanks for listening.